Good day to all of you. On behalf of Messe Frankfurt and MEX Exhibitions, I'm pleased to welcome all of you today to discuss what's next in the apparel industry and see if there is any vision for change. I'm Priyanka Pawar, Group Exhibition Head, responsible for the textile shows with Messe Frankfurt and your host for this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. This coronavirus has effectively pressed the pause button on the fashion industry's retail and manufacturing operations. But behind the scenes, industry insiders are churning with ideas and strategies for the sector's eventual re-emergence. But how? In the state of necessity, global fashion must first restore confidence in itself and its business model. The supply shock in factories now supersedes the demand shock that's followed. The question is, post-virus, how will process innovation help to reinvent the fashion supply chain to be more responsive, sustainable, and profitable? It's crucial for all of us to understand how human minds can be so far superior than the virus that is not even visible. It gives me immense pleasure today to welcome our speaker for this session, Mr. John Thorbeck, who's here with us today. He will be sharing his experience and insights on how a fashion manufacturer can fine-tune his production plan once the lockdown opens up. Mr. John Thorbeck is the chairman of Change Capital, a firm focused for fashion industry transformation. Mr. John is also the co-author of Stanford-based Zara Gap, the financial model and metric for speed and capital, case study on fast fashion strategies and process and data innovation that aligns shared value with social impact in global supply chain. He is a former CEO of PVH, Adidas, and a senior executive for Timberland and Nike. John has received an MBA in Harvard Business School, and today he will be sharing a small story with us. It's 5 a.m. in his city, and we're really grateful to him for sparing his time and interacting with our audience of Gartex Express. A very good morning to you and a very warm welcome. But before we begin, I request all the attendees to post their general discussion in the chat box. While if there are any specific questions related to the seminar today, you can post it in the Q&A box, which will be addressed after the session. Over to you, Mr. Thorbeck.
Thank you, Priyanka. Good morning. I'm in California, so my morning and your evening, but I'm delighted to be on the call, and I appreciate everyone participating at what may be the dinner hour for you. So I want to begin with a story. What I'm going to tell you has its beginnings actually in an India study that I participated in, and it's really one of the reasons I'm delighted to speak to an Indian audience, because really India was the inspiration for a global study that led me down this path that I continue to work on. So let me give you a little background, and my background will maybe show a bit of my age as well. In the 90s, I hope there are some who can remember, the early 90s in India, as India was just beginning to open up and consider, its global competitiveness, both in India but also outside of India. There was considerable concern about the textile industry. At the time, textiles was considered to be related to nearly a third of the Indian economy. And this was a priority for the finance minister at the time, who was Manmohan Singh, but also, one of the largest banks, ICICI, and a chairman who I recall his name was Bagal at the time. So Singh and Bagal combined their resources behind a study at Harvard Business School. And that was led by a wonderful man. He was actually the first tenured professor from India at Harvard Business School. His name was Ramchandran Jaykumar. We called him J. Kumar. And Jay led this study. And the study asked the question of how competitive would India be in a global textile industry, and what might India do to differentiate itself in that large global market, especially considering all of the strengths in China. So that was really my first experience on looking at the textile industry globally. It was a very exciting time and study and sponsorship. And, you know, in some ways we've made some progress, in some ways we haven't, but it gives me, I guess, a chance to return to an Indian audience and, you know, let's review what started in India and maybe what the state of the industry is today. Of course, right now we're in a state of necessity, as Priyanka said. And what's particularly concerning about this situation is, you know, it's supply shock. You know, usually when there's been a downturn, it's been because of demand. And we've all been through those cycles and we've seen that. It's a difficult, you know, global business, but in this case, we have a demand shock, but maybe a supply shock that is even worse. So I want to be careful not to talk past the pain that we all feel right now. And when I speak of pain, I'm really not just referencing economic pain. There's tremendous human pain and cost that is on everybody's mind. So it's difficult to talk past that, but that is our current mindset. If there's something to be said for thinking of tomorrow, is maybe if we can think of a better tomorrow, we can get there faster. But certainly a strong point is we're paying a high cost in this crisis right now, and that's not just in India, that's worldwide. And to return in some kind of cycle to how this industry operates just simply can't happen. And so this really is a time to consider how this industry not just can recover, but reinvent itself. And that's in everybody's interest. And we're going to talk about that in considerable, you know, detail. But the point is, let's look forward. Let's not look past our pain, but let's look forward. And the idea is the vision that we have for the future. I think our role here is to accelerate that. If there's reason to be in business and there's reason for good news, then we all should share in that. So certainly the virus, we need not dwell on that, but there really was a plague of inventory before the virus. And so it's kind of bad news on top of what was already a very bad trend. And excess inventory has been a problem because it really is it really is a high cost for the amount of risk and uncertainty in this industry. And we try to insulate ourselves from that risk and uncertainty and the investments in inventory, but that's been very difficult to do. From a US perspective or even a European perspective, you know, the way to deal with uncertainty is to try to cushion it with lowest cost sourcing. And that's led to long lead times, volume buying, and you know, a very high cost. And I'm going to detail some of those later. So it's a difficult business to be competitive in, especially if the cost, if the main economic incentive is to find lowest cost sourcing. I think that is usually called the race to the bottom. I would say we're all very close to it now, and there's no future in that. So what are the alternatives? you know, to a lowest cost environment where every factory, every country is competing with each other, and large global buyers are taking advantage of that, and maybe exploiting that kind of competition, but also taking full advantage of, you know, excess capacity and the desire to supply that volume. We need an alternative to a lowest cost, you know, industry. So I have focused particularly on, I'm going to shift here to a few slides and see if they're helpful. We've got an introduction, so I'll go forward on that. So change capital here is, see if I can enlarge that. We're certainly talking about a large degree of change, and really the name, you know, was actually inspired by change the supply chain. So the idea that the supply chain in textiles, you know, needs to be reinvented is not a new idea, and certainly its dysfunctions are probably well known to a lot of people. So that's where change comes from, change the supply chain. And in particular, I want to focus on capital. So I'm really interested in change, not for its incremental improvements, but really for how we can, you know, make this an industry that isn't quite so low profit, low growth, and low technology. So we've been working on this for quite a while. And I mentioned to you Jay Jacomar at Harvard Business School, who was a very important inspiration. Jay's feeling after studying the Indian textile industry was that its location was not a disadvantage, that in fact India could be quite competitive, and that the future was built on speed and flexibility and technology. And I would say that's still a formula that has a tremendous amount of upside. Unfortunately, we lost Jay. Jay died in a tragic accident, mountain climbing, believe it or not. But I was happy to continue this work at Stanford University with a professor named Warren Hausman. So again, I want to emphasize that the depth here of the research, the case studies, the you know, the financial analysis behind this runs very deep at both Harvard and Stanford. Professor Hausman and I have written on this subject, and the main point I want to make here is we're not talking about you know, we're talking about a magnitude of opportunity that is significant, and that is not just in earnings and profitability, but in market capitalizations for major retailers and brands and suppliers of nearly 30 to 40%. Now that's a strong statement in an industry that is not known for profitability, and in fact is probably better known for its volatility and its low profit. But I want to put that magnitude of benefit in your mind, even if you are doubtful, because what's very important is that the supplier community needs to participate in that value. And, you know, so we're going to be discussing about how that can happen. So there's a lot to be said for process innovation. And process innovation, you know, our study has been the electronics industry. We certainly are very familiar with the auto industry and Toyota and that story. But closer to apparel was what could be learned from speed and flexibility in the electronics industry, and how might that benefit the fashion industry. So starting with process innovation, And by process innovation, I really mean lead times. You know, what is the formula, you know, that would not just contribute to greater efficiency, but also, you know, greater end-to-end productivity, you know, across every tier of the supply chain. So for the purposes of our discussion, I'm defining it as how downstream meaning closer to the consumer, is linked back to upstream. Upstream is where most of us are on this call. And upstream means closer to materials and closer to factories. And that kind of analog and digital divide is very important. And so process innovation in our perspective and experience is called lead time optimization. And it means that you integrate design and development, you stage capacities and hedge materials so that you can be more flexible closer to season. You're able to postpone finished goods commitments closer to season and reduce lead times. And you're optimizing total profit versus first cost minimization. The last one is very important because there's a tremendous amount of inefficiency and lost capital in this supply chain. And if you're always focused on cost of goods sold and what the ex-factory price is, you're always at a disadvantage. And it's my very strong opinion, experience, and documentation that the upstream levers are critical for brands and retailers to achieve a much higher profitability. So that puts the factories in a very important position. So these are the elements for process innovation. And if, you know, I won't spend too much time on this, but essentially it means it changes the finished goods relationship. So instead of just negotiating on finished goods with a customer, you're negotiating across the elements of speed and flexibility, which is positioning raw materials, hedging those materials, staging capacities, postponing goods, and then making a transportation decision. The value, actually quantifying the value of speed and flexibility versus lowest cost, is very important. Now, I also want to emphasize that we're not talking about an entire order. We're talking about a significant percentage. It need not be large, but its profit impact is very high. So let's just keep in mind, there's a lot to be done on process innovation and the relationship with customers. So how do we do that? We're breaking down the finished goods relationship into collaboration across platforming for fabrics, staging available capacity, hedging those materials, postponing decisions closer to season and closer to demand, and then optimizing when to make that decision. So those are 5 elements in process innovation, but it calls for it calls for much more collaboration. It calls for sharing of process and data, but it also shares risk. So the idea that you simply want to maximize your orders, fill factory capacity, and that you are willing to give an aggressive price for that, that's been a model that I think is less attractive, to say the least. And we need to move more toward what I will call global postponement. There are elements of this, but very little of it in the industry. And a very important, part of this potential is that, location really doesn't matter. In fact, it's just remarkable that Jay Jacomar would take the position that you should really be able to do 10 days anywhere in the world, wherever you are. And he felt very strongly that India's location was not an obstacle at all if we could have process innovation and then bring tools for collaboration. So the difference we're talking about here, we've talked about process innovation, we've talked about magnitude of benefit, and we're talking about moving from months of lead time to days. Those days may be as short as 30 days. Most of you are in 3, 4, and 5 month lead times on order cycles, and we can, so the improvement, the benefit we're talking about here is not small. It goes from months to days. So the formula behind that is how speed and data science combine for lead time optimization. This is the technology tools, but it's built on process innovation. And process innovation is very meaningful. It can change an entire industry. It did it in the auto industry. It also did it in the electronics industry. And now we're asking, how might it be done in the fashion industry? We have tremendous data in terms of demand, but that data and knowledge and insight into demand does not get incorporated into a flexible relationship with factories. So data science tools that take the signals and the demand signals and turn that into a react strategy is an enormous opportunity. We work on those tools. We call that lead time optimization, but the most important thing is process first and then the tools follow. It's also very important that we're looking at a total profitability here. And so it's not only more important for those demand signals to be more visible to you, but so too should the economics be, because the losses at the retail side because of long lead times and high uncertainty are dramatic. And those losses include the markdowns, include the stockouts, but it also includes excess financing costs, working capital, finished goods inventory, things that margins can really no longer cover. So there are some examples and some inspiration here to pay attention to. And so let's talk about this from the other end. Companies that companies that you've heard about. What is it that makes Amazon so powerful? And of course, they do many things well, but in particular, their consumer advantage is at the last mile. And so they've created an asset out of the ability to deliver and convenience, whether that it takes 12 hours or 24 hours, and to do so with free shipping and free returns. They've focused on the last mile. But they've distributed their risk as well, because 3/4 of the inventory that they handle, they don't own. And so they're able to create speed in the last mile, and to do so at much less risk. And it creates a financial model that is obviously very attractive. So we can learn from Amazon about how they've reduced uncertainty and risk. And let's look at another example. What is it about Walmart that has given them a powerful advantage and has created a $500 billion global retailer? Walmart's advantage is really built on distribution strengths, and it pays the same prices as everybody else. It has a tremendous volume buying potential, but its real strength is its regional distribution and its ability to distribute from its warehouses to stores faster and better than anyone else. So I call that the mid-mile. So Walmart and Amazon are competitors, but they're built on different models. I hope that that's clear. So what about the first mile? So first mile refers to the upstream part of the supply chain. And Zara has done an excellent job. I could have used Apple Computer here as an example outside of our industry because it's similar to Zara. So when we're talking about first mile, we're talking about the beginning, which is the upstream factory and material relationship. And Zara has been able to capitalize on speed and flexibility at that level. But it's very interesting here that Zara does not do this on a global basis. It does it largely in its European supply base. So the opportunity, it's very important to emphasize that the point of view here is not to simply be like Zara. I'm really saying that this is an opportunity for Zara as well on a global basis. So because how they source globally, especially in Asia, is much like everybody else. And so they have the opportunity, and they would agree with that point of view. So here you have some options. You focus on the last mile, you focus on the mid-mile, you focus on the first mile. What about the magic mile? The magic mile, now, I don't want to be misinterpreted here, so it's very important that that is meant to be ironic. That is not a compliment. The magic mile is thinking that your discounts and your customer segmentation and your promotions and continuing to look for cheaper and cheaper sources, the reinvention of store experience, new styles, all of the things that try to generate demand is an attempt to sort of create or recreate or rediscover the magic in this business. So across this matrix, where is opportunity? Where would you concentrate? And I'm really saying that the first mile is a supply-led advantage. And I think that's the good news for the supplier community. I think our experience with face masks in the COVID-19 experience is a crash course in global supply chains, and especially for the fashion industry. So what can we do with that new visibility? And I also think brands and retailers are beginning to look at the upstream relationship as a source of value, a much more important relationship, and are beginning to understand that speed and flexibility depends on a better relationship there. Now, I know that that is not true across the board. Many retailers are canceling. They may be doing so harshly. They may be asking for better terms, whether it's further discounts or more payment terms. And that's not what we're talking about. What would have to happen is going the other way, is we need to find a formula to share risk and to share reward. Because back to the original point, the magnitude of benefit is so significant that it's an incentive that it be shared across all tiers of the supply chain. We can't continue to simply go and find cheaper and cheaper sources. I think that that is an important point for you to believe in, because the supplier community is the key to higher profitability. I can't emphasize that enough. And if we were in the same room together, I would be repeating that many times. The economics of that are very strong. It's also an issue of really fairness, and it needs to be driven by not just process innovations, but also the incentives that can accelerate it, and of course the tools that support it. So what's the overall enemy here is uncertainty, and uncertainty prevails for everybody. And that's true at the retailer and the brand level. The retailer and the brand is paying a high cost for design and development. They're paying high costs of markdowns and lost sales. And they're looking to overcome that uncertainty with the highest possible margin. But it's not the highest possible margin here that succeeds. And I think excellent examples of that are the three that we discussed: Amazon, Zara, and Walmart. So there really should not be an obstacle here in terms of room to negotiate. Everything doesn't have to be at lowest possible cost. So where we're especially going is looking at an industry that is chronically over inventoried. There's always an excess of inventory, and that cost falls hard on everybody. We've heard about speed to market for many years, but very few people have actually given it the priority that it deserves. And so we've moved on to a more more concern here around sustainability. Sustainability is a concern that is not going to go away because it's a consumer concern. It's not a it's not a brand or retail luxury. It really is what consumers demand, and I think that that is true worldwide. And then we find ourselves in a situation of very scarce capital. So, three issues: inventory, sustainability, and capital are all related. In fact, I would say those three are inseparable. And the unlock to all three of those is in the upstream relationship with factories. So again, if I could point to a little blue sky that is not far away, I think there's an opportunity here for everyone at each tier in the supply chain to participate in process innovation. And I think the openness and awareness by the best retailers is there. So what we have now is common cause. And common cause, another word for common cause might be shared purpose. And I'm sure you've heard the phrases shared value and shared values. This is very important. And I think shared purpose is the most motivating of all, because now with this incredible visibility, demands for ethical practices, demands for transparency, demands for fair treatment and living wages in the worker community is very, very important. And when I say it's important, I don't mean that as a statement of personal values. I think it really is a commitment on the part of consumers worldwide. So is there an alternative that can work for the benefit of everyone across the supply chain? We're looking here at an end-to-end point of view, and I think it belongs, it begins upstream. And I would like to believe that if the factories have a greater understanding of their leverage and potential in the total profitability of the supply chain, then I think they can benefit from it. So I didn't go into a tremendous amount of detail there on how that risk is shared, but how that risk is created, or how that value is created, is critical. So let's review that. So, and I know this is a lot. It's just, I think I have 9 slides here, and each of these slides is a story. So what is a sustainable business model, and what is a vision for the future? Well, first of all, sustainable has to be economic. It has to work at every tier in the supply chain. It has to work upstream, it has to work downstream. It can't simply be lowest cost participation for the benefit of retailers themselves. So we're looking at a change in the relationship, and it begins with process innovation. I would call that speed plus shared value, and social impact, and it's in my screen, it'd be in the left-hand corner. So process innovation to mitigate risk and improve profitability. Secondly, you're looking at a different set of financial metrics, because metrics really need to capture speed and flexibility. And those metrics are really more focused on how can you be much more productive. So it isn't just simply a focus on cost of goods sold and ex-factory price. It really is quantifying speed and flexibility. And conventional metrics do not capture that, and I think investors are beginning to understand that. Another set of metrics closely related to this are what are called ESG metrics, which are also being much more influential with investors and retailers. By ESG, I mean environmental, social, and governance. So those three together add pressure on a different way to measure market value and also social value. The first mile. You've heard about the last mile, but I really think the land of opportunity is to reinvent the relationship with first mile. And first mile is where the factories are, it's where materials are, it's where the mills are. The first mile relationship is no longer hidden, and it's becoming critical as we look for opportunity in this business. There's leverage in the first mile. On the upper right-hand side is the Zara Gap model. This is the modeling we've done at Stanford, the case studies, the consulting, the research. So we're convinced the argument for economics and speed and flexibility is directly related to market value. There really is no better alternative. Economics alone does not necessarily persuade or win the argument, but it's very, very powerful. And economics are on our side, and it's not hard to justify the magnitude of benefit here. In the middle is lead time optimization, which is we're optimizing for supply flexibility, and we're really focused on speed and flexibility more than we are on lowest cost. Total profit does not depend on lowest cost. Total profit depends on how you can reduce uncertainty and reduce risk for every partner in the supply chain. And then lastly is data science. There's there's sort of transaction tools, but we're still operating on Excel spreadsheets and a lot of manual work. And while we're living in a world of very digital customers and a tremendous amount of data about consumers and demand, we have very few tools that bring analytics to the upstream relationships. And so I think these 6 are critical as kind of the elements of a sustainable business model. So you might ask, well, if this makes sense, why hasn't there been more of a movement? And if you, John, have been looking at this since the 90s, why hasn't there been, greater progress? Well, it's because there's always been alternatives. And if there are easier alternatives by going to a cheaper source or moving to, other countries, people have taken the easy choices. But those costs are being paid now, and I think we've reached a limit where there really isn't, a lower cost alternative. So I'm looking here at the time just to make sure that I don't run over. So I want to just leave you with a strong statement. There is an alternative to the current environment. And that alternative is a benefit not just to the supplier community, but also to retailers and brands. Most importantly, it's very meaningful to consumers, and consumers are going to need a reason to be back in fashion. I think we've suffered a bit here because fashion is considered non-essential, but it is essential in terms of its employment and its engine. It's the most globalized industry. It may be the largest employer of women worldwide. It was the school for globalization as cotton and textiles became a worldwide industry. What happens here matters. And so if we have to show that globalization can work in a new and better way, and it can be a more equitable relationship so that we can create a more sustainable business model, then I think that's a good future for fashion. A very small number of brands and retailers have proven that a low profit, low growth, low tech industry is not doomed to simply that kind of future. So I think there's tremendous productivity, but it's going to have to come around a new relationship, and I would call that relationship shared purpose. So Priyanka, I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure that has created some questions, maybe even some confusion. Would you like me to say more, or are there some questions?
Yes, there are a lot of questions. And in fact, I think it was quite intense as a session. And I'm sure our audience is curious to know a lot of things. I think the first question I will shoot to you is, what are your thoughts about fast fashion moving forward?
Well, fast fashion, again, you look at the process. What happened with fast fashion in terms of Zara? People, speed is actually an argument for capital. So by reducing the lead times, you're reducing risk, and you're able to create payment cycles with faster, more frequent orders and deliveries and payments. So I am favorable toward fast fashion. I want to be careful because now it's being used in a negative way, and it's thought of as cheap or exploitational. And it need not be that way. Remember, Zara owns 13 factories in Spain. You know, they know, you know, they're very respectful of factories. I think many other people have abused definition of fast fashion, but I think fast fashion is an argument, you know, for less risk and greater value, but it has to be used in an ethical way.
So when people today are talking about moving towards slow fashion post-COVID, does that make any sense, or they should consider about fast fashion, the ethics, and then move forward?
Well, fast fashion does not need to be cheap. Fast fashion is, we're talking about process innovation that can happen at any level, okay? And there's nothing wrong with slow fashion. I think that's important, but it isn't going to change the industry. It's going to be a part of the industry, and it should be an option. But, you know, fast fashion, you notice that I stayed away from that term. I'm really talking about, because fast fashion, I think leads to, it doesn't have a single definition. And I think I want to be careful that it's not misinterpreted. But fast fashion is a way to reduce the risk, you know, in the industry. And so its process change and its speed and flexibility is worth considering.
The second question is, one of our audience wants to know, is there any future for investing in new garment business after Corona? Is it worth investing now, or should he wait for a while?
Well, I think you have to pick your moment, but yes, I think there will be small brands. It's a good time to be entrepreneurial. I think a younger customer wants to identify with brands and is not interested in big volume. Yes,
So would you like to share something about you know, value-added products right now, to start with, maybe the antimicrobial or something that is needed by the consumers, or can be a regular fast fashion, slow fashion kind of businesses that they can do?
If I understood that question, you know, I think either starting brands or identifying with direct-to-consumer and beginning with a new model. It's hard to change an old model, but it may be easier to make a clean start on one that has much less risk and is built on speed and flexibility. That is very accessible.
Mr. Thorbeck, you mentioned about the Magic Mile. Would you be able to share some examples on the companies which come in this quadrant of Magic Mile?
It's most companies. In other words, they're trying to create magic. You know, in a U.S. context, you know, Macy's has said we're going to reinvent the store. You know, Gap has said we're going to close our stores, or we're going to, you know, create new fashion. Other people are investing in data programs and loyalty programs and personalizations. You know, there's other people have moved into recycling and resale and rental. So all of these have value, but they don't change the profit equation. And so, you know, it maybe is not a good joke, but I'm saying they're looking for magic. You know, the magic is not there. And, you know, and right now people think that they can, people think that by asking for more discounts and more terms and to put more pressure on suppliers, I would say that's a magic strategy, and there's no magic in that. You know, it really has to go the other way, you know, especially if you really understand how important the upstream relationship can be.
All right. So one of our audience also wants to know is what and how to identify a first mile, the trends and the value that they can bring to the brand. Another question related to this is the first mile is no doubt being one of the best or the good way, uh, but there lies quantity and quality for retailers and brand. How can we or anyone utilize the first mile approach to the low quantity ordering for retailers and brands?
Well, I've written about that in great detail, and I always feel that the factories, you're in a trap if you're only talking about cost of goods sold and the X factory price. You're focused on productivity, you're focused on material cost, you're focused on labor cost. Okay, you need to participate in the total profit picture, the end-to-end view of the economics, because the excess cost in financing, in working capital, being aware of the profitability of that retailer has, you need to know markdowns, you need to know what their lost sales are. That is difficult data to come from, but the point is you negotiate by saying, I can improve your total profitability, okay? And we should participate in that together. Not only should you share my risk, but we should also share in the reward. So it's a different negotiating position, but don't be trapped in just, you know, cost of goods sold and the FOB price. That's a very uncomfortable position. You need quality, you need service, you need compliance, but most importantly, you are an engine for your customers' profitability.
What's your view about difference between online retail and in-store retail? Do you think post-COVID online will pick up more and have more opportunities over a retail store?
Yes, online will certainly grow. The problem with online, though, is it's more expensive. You know, it's more expensive in its logistics. It's more expensive in servicing and finding customers. And so it is a growth channel. And I would say online adds to the argument for speed and flexibility.
Well, may I request you to share your maybe some comments about the industry, maybe India as a market or Europe or USA, because you've seen that we've lost the main seasons or the main festive time. India is losing on the Eid and the Diwali market. US is losing on the Christmas market because a lot of orders are not being placed for Christmas. How do you think, or what is your opinion about the next 6 months? What should one do to ensure they have optimized their business and the model going forward?
I think we need to, I don't think you can count on large orders. So I think the orders need to be smaller, more frequent, with faster payment cycles. And I would hope that factories would present that option as a way to generate capital, because borrowing against orders or financing it with a customer is going to be very expensive and very difficult. So at least a percentage of those orders, can we break up our orders to deliver on faster cycles? I think we should be exploring that option.
So the key, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I'm very hopeful for India. I'm very, India has an important role to play, and India can compete versus China. It has high quality. It has a historical importance of the cotton and textile industry. It has tremendous technical capabilities. It just needs to be brought into this industry. And there are examples, Nike being one, of an ability to create volume, out of India without a cost advantage. And I believe that that can be done. I also think that India, the social argument for India is also very strong. So I think you have economics, you have technology, you have social arguments. All of these should be powerful incentives for the Indian textile industry. It's you know, but there just needs to be a vision that makes it a creator of value rather than giving that value away.
So the key takeaway that I look at it as, India has everything right now in terms of the ingredients to make a production or manufacturing. What they have to look at is shorter lead times, faster revolving times, or faster generation of orders so that they get in the money faster, and a smaller quantity. Not looking at larger quantities, not looking at bigger orders immediately. And, you know, and that's where they can survive for the next 6-8 months and then take it up from there.
Right. And understand, begin to invest in the upstream economics, okay, because those are the levers that have downstream importance to customers, and then the upstream tools. And those upstream tools can make a huge difference. And, you know, I believe that there really is no better alternative than, you know, an upstream relationship. You know, we've proven that over and over again. I would love to share more material on that to you, Priyanka, and you know, others in India. You know, it's an inarguable position.
Wow. We definitely want to hear more from you, and I think we will stay in touch, not just today, but also after the session. India needs, you know, experts like you to understand how and what should we do in terms of, you know, monetizing a business model and getting it much more effective. With this, I am thanking you. I'm really grateful that you could make this time for us. It's really early in the morning, and that, I mean, it's impossible that we could think of, you know, getting up early at 5 o'clock and doing the session. So thank you so much for doing this for us. And we hope that we stay in touch with each other going forward, and we seek your support for Gartex and Text Process in the coming edition.
Thank you, Priyanka. I hope we all have better days ahead.
Yes, we all, I hope so. And wishing you good health as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.